The auction yard smelled of dust and sun-baked straw, the kind of air that turned sweat gritty and burned into the back of your throat like old tobacco. Men in wide hats leaned against split rails, boots scuffed, faces harder than saddle leather. Women, few and silent, stood with arms folded tight, watching the spectacle from behind fans or kerchiefs, as if trying not to breathe it in too deeply. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the heat like a bullwhip, shouting over the restless thrum of livestock and people waiting to see a miracle or a mess. The stallion had been a mess from the start. Steel gray with a mane like wildfire and eyes that promised no forgiveness, he'd arrived just after dawn in a rusted trailer hitched to a truck that coughed smoke and prayers. It took 5 men to unload him. 2 walked away with limp arms. 1 with a split lip. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew what the brand on his left flank meant. A failed war horse, turned loose after his last rider left the saddle in a bloodied heap. He wasn't broke. He was broken. But not quiet. They brought him into the ring like he was a captured outlaw, ropes tangled around muscle and fury, hooves slamming the ground like hammers. The crowd leaned back without meaning to, eyes narrowing as the animal twisted and fought against everything. Heat, halters, human hands. Lot 47, the auctioneer hollered, voice tightening. 6-year-old stallion, papered, unrideable, temperament needs work. Someone snorted at that. Starting at $50. Laughter cracked open across the crowd. $50 was a courtesy offer, the kind reserved for half-dead hens or barn cats missing tails. In the back of the crowd, behind the hay bales stacked as makeshift bleachers, stood the child. Thin. Barefoot. No taller than a saddle horn. One hand clutched the edge of a faded wool coat 2 sizes too big, the other held a wrinkled slip of paper. The child didn't blink as the stallion screamed again, nostrils wide and wild, body drenched in sweat and defiance. Everyone else saw a problem. The orphan, nobody knew the name, saw something else entirely. Bids didn't come. Not real ones. A drunk offered $1 to shoot the beast and sell the hide. A rancher grunted 10 just to get the bidding started, then shook his head as the stallion reared and nearly yanked a man's shoulder from its socket. "Pass him off to the dog meat folks," someone said. "Ain't worth the spit in my canteen." But the auctioneer kept shouting like it mattered. And then, "I'll take him." The voice was quiet. Unremarkable. But it stopped the air. Heads turned slowly, eyes trying to match that voice to someone grown, someone sane. But it was the child who had spoken, stepping forward into the dust. The coat hung off them like a scarecrow's disguise, but the chin was lifted. The eyes held steady. They looked right at the stallion, who suddenly stopped thrashing as if trying to remember this small figure from another life. The auctioneer blinked. "You." The child nodded. "Yes, sir. I've got $5 and a pocket knife." The crowd burst open with laughter. It rolled like thunder, sharp, mean, mocking. The kind of laughter meant to push a soul back into silence. But the child didn't move. Just waited. One of the handlers leaned toward the auctioneer. "Hell no," he muttered. "That thing'll kill them." Another man nodded. "Should have put him down weeks ago." The auctioneer frowned, thumbed sweat from his brow, then leaned over the mic. "Son, or Miss, that horse ain't for you." "I'm not for sale either," the child said. That stopped a few chuckles short. The auctioneer sighed. "I can't take your offer. We need a real buyer. With real money." The child held out the wrinkled slip. "It's a deed. Says I get 1 animal from the sheriff's levy, my choice. My mama's name was Margaret Ellis." A stir passed through the crowd like dust catching wind. Margaret Ellis. That name had weight once. A midwife. A widow. A woman who gave everything to a town that gave little back. She died last winter, lungs full of cold and grief. Folks had half forgotten she'd had a child. No kin claimed the orphan. Nobody had taken the kid in. But the sheriff had owed Margaret Ellis something, and it seemed the child had come to collect. The auctioneer unfolded the slip with a frown. "This ain't legal tender. No. the child agreed. But it's a promise. Silence settled in like ash. Then a man spat. Promise won't hold offense. Another man, younger, muttered, let the kid have the beast. It'll sort itself quick. A few murmurs followed. Some cruel. Some curious. The stallion shifted again, his chest rising and falling like storm tides. But his eyes never left the child. The wildness was still there, but different, watchful, tired. After a long moment, the auctioneer spoke. Kid, he's yours. But God help you. The rope was handed over. Rough, frayed. The child didn't flinch. Took the lead like it was nothing more than a morning chore. The stallion snorted, one hoof dragging a slow line in the dirt. The handlers stepped back, bracing. The child didn't tug, didn't shout, just whispered. Nobody heard the words. But the stallion froze, ears twitching forward. And after a breathless pause, he stepped. One pace. Then another. Not calm. Not tame. But listening. Watching. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't move. They just stood there, mouths half open, minds trying to reorder what they'd just seen. The child and the stallion walked past them like smoke slipping through fingers. Outside the auction yard, the world smelled of mesquite and broken dreams. The sun had begun to tilt, throwing long shadows across the hard-packed road. The stallion tossed his head once, but kept walking beside the child, the rope loose between them. At the edge of the lot stood a man in a wide-brim hat and a long canvas coat, leaning on a crooked walking stick. He'd been there most of the morning, saying nothing, just watching. He nodded once as the pair passed. He'll try to kill you, you know. The child glanced up. He might. And you think you can stop him? No. But maybe I don't have to. The man let out a dry chuckle, like boots on gravel. Takes a certain kind of fool to walk beside something that dangerous. The child didn't answer. Just kept walking. Behind them, the auctioneer called for the next lot. Another horse. Another price. But the story that would be told in bars and bunkhouses wouldn't be about Lot 48 or the spotted mare that sold for a song. It would be about the kid with no boots, a slip of paper, and the look of someone who'd seen too much too early. And the stallion who followed, not because he was broken, but because maybe, just maybe, he saw something in that child that looked a little like freedom. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun had dipped low enough to burn the horizon gold. The wind kicked up, carrying the scent of cedar and change. The stallion snorted and pawed the earth, but he stayed. Not tied. Not tethered. Just there. The child sat on a rock, pulled a biscuit from their coat pocket, and broke it in half. The stallion sniffed, nostrils flaring. Then, slow as memory, he lowered his head and took it. There was no triumph in it. No magic. Just a breath between what was and what might be. And the first sound of a new story, waiting to be written. The cabin wasn't much. A slanted roof, a stovepipe leaning like it had given up on standing straight, windows fogged with years of breath and grime. But it was dry, and it was theirs, if a thing abandoned to weeds and wood rot could ever belong to anyone. The child pushed open the creaking door with a shoulder, dust curling in the air like ghosts startled from sleep. The stallion hesitated at the threshold. His hooves clinked against the stones. He could have bolted. Should have. But he didn't. He watched the child disappear into the gloom and, after a few uncertain snorts, stepped inside. The air was thick with mildew, but the bones of the place were strong. A cot with a sagging center. A stove with a cracked door. Two shelves that leaned toward each other, as if whispering over whatever had once filled them. The child didn't light a lamp. Just dropped the canvas bag on the floor, knelt, and began unwrapping the oilskin bundle. Bread, jerky, a tin of boiled beans, and a tinier tin of something sweeter. Sugar, maybe. Or salt. They held the last up to the light filtering through the boards and smiled. The stallion snorted again. His breath fogged in the air. He pawed once at the warped plank, then lay down, slowly, warily, legs folding like a structure too proud to collapse outright. His ribs heaved. His eyes stayed wide. He didn't trust the walls or the roof, and he didn't trust the quiet. "Me neither," the child said. They chewed in silence, the beans eaten cold. No fire. The chimney needed clearing, and there were no matches anyway. But hunger didn't wait on comfort. The stallion didn't eat. But he watched. Every movement. Every breath. The child didn't ask him to come closer. They didn't name him either. You don't name things you haven't earned. Morning spilled in sideways through a cracked window. The world outside was all frost and barbed grass, pale as bone. The child slipped from the cot and pulled on boots patched at the sole with pine tar. The stallion lifted his head, alert again, as if he hadn't slept at all. "We need water," the child said, mostly to themselves. And with that, the day began. The pump stood half a mile west of the cabin, near a dry creek bed where frogs used to sing in spring. It hadn't run properly in years. But the child knew its rusted threads, its stubborn handle. A few drops came first, then a sputter, then a stream like liquid iron. They filled the tin pail halfway before it grew too heavy for their arm. Behind them, the stallion watched from the trees. "You don't have to follow," they said without looking back. But he did. Each step the stallion took was a test. Of soil. Of sound. Of the child. He stayed close enough to see their spines shift beneath the coat, but far enough to bolt if the world cracked wrong. Back at the cabin, the child set the pail down and fetched a wooden bowl. They poured slowly, careful not to spill, and slid it forward without eye contact. The stallion sniffed. Then drank. It was the first peace between them. The first agreement. That afternoon, the child climbed to the loft. The ladder moaned. So did their legs. Up top, everything was covered in burlap and mouse droppings. But behind the old wool blankets, beneath the boards with the burn marks, they found what they'd hoped, the saddle. Not a good one. But not broken either. Just old. They ran their hand over the worn leather, traced the initials burned into the strap, M.E. Their mother's saddle. By nightfall, the child had cleared the hearth, stacked dry kindling, and managed a tiny fire. Enough to warm hands. Enough to keep the dark at bay. The stallion stood by the window, watching the flicker as if it might ask for something. "You're still wild," the child said. "But so was my mother." The stallion flicked his ears. "My mama delivered babies out past Stone Ridge. Rode at night, storm or not. She carried me in the saddlebag once. Folks said she was half ghost, half horse. But really, she just didn't scare easy." The child leaned against the stones of the hearth, eyes bright in the orange glow. "I don't scare easy either." The stallion didn't move. But his body softened a fraction, like a man putting down a knife, but not far. By the third day, the wind changed. Clouds stacked like bruises over the ridge, and the pines whispered of snow. The child gathered what wood they could, wrapping rope around their waist to drag branches. The stallion followed again, never helping, never hindering. Just watching. At night, the child brushed the mud from his flanks. He let them. Barely. His muscles flinched with every stroke, but he didn't lash out. It wasn't kindness. It was permission. They found the first wound that night. A long, pale scar across his chest, deep and old, with jagged edges that hadn't healed smooth. The child touched it gently. "I know what it's like. To carry something nobody sees unless you're bleeding again." The stallion huffed, nostrils flaring. But he didn't pull away. Later, wrapped in every blanket the cabin had, the child stared at the roof beams. "There's something wrong with you," they murmured. "But broken things don't scare me." That night, the stallion didn't sleep standing. He lay down beside the cold hearth, his breath calm, steady. Winter came harder than it should have. The snow arrived like a thief, not drifting but falling in sheets that choked out the sky. The child blocked the door with firewood, stuffed gaps in the wall with feed sacks and hay. The stallion paced at first, hooves uneasy on the slick floor. But when the wind howled, he turned inward, literally and otherwise. They stayed that way for 2 days. The storm trapped them in the dim hush of survival. The child's voice was the only sound, reading aloud from a water-stained book found in a drawer. Stories of warriors and wolves, of mountains walked and giants outwitted. They didn't know all the words. That didn't stop them. On the 3rd morning, the storm relented. The world outside was made of white silence. The child stepped out first, breath smoking. The stallion followed, hoofprints side by side in the new snow. They walked to the creek bed, now frozen, and listened. Nothing but the crack of branches under weight, and the distant echo of crows. The child looked at the stallion, their face red with cold. "I think you were supposed to be something else. Maybe a war horse. Maybe a racer. But now you're just here. Like me." The stallion didn't respond. But his body leaned a little closer. On the 5th day, the child tried the saddle. They didn't tie him down. Didn't trick him. Just set the leather gently on his back while whispering the old songs their mother used to hum. Songs about rivers and freedom and horses that never came home. The stallion stood still. The child didn't tighten the girth. Didn't climb aboard. Just stood beside him for a long time. Then took the saddle back off. The next morning, they tried again. On the 7th day, the saddle stayed, and the child climbed on. The stallion didn't bolt. He didn't run, didn't fight, didn't throw the child to the ground. He just stood. A mountain waiting to remember it once knew how to move. Then, slowly, step by step, they walked. Through the snow. Through the silence. Not a ride. Not yet. But a promise. And from a distance, the man with the walking stick watched. Again. From behind a stand of trees, smoke from a chimney curling behind him, he watched the orphan and the warhorse trace slow circles in the snow. He didn't smile. But something in his eyes shifted, like memory trying to thaw. "She's not training you," he murmured under his breath. "You're choosing." The stallion stopped for a breath. His ears turned. He saw the man. And then he turned away. Not in fear. Not in challenge. In acknowledgement. That night, the child sat by the fire, journal open on their lap. A single word written inside. Tomorrow. They didn't know where they'd go. Or when. Or how. But the cabin had served its time. And the stallion, he had stopped pacing the walls. The snow still fell outside. But it didn't feel like an end anymore. It felt like the start of a trail. One not yet broken. But waiting. The trail down from the mountain was narrow and sun-starved, a switchback carved through frostbitten underbrush and black rock, too steep for wagons and too quiet for birds. Snow still crusted in the shadows, even though the sky had turned blue and gold, and the creek had begun to run again, slicing the world into halves, before and after. The child sat astride the stallion now, no saddle, no bit, just a worn rope wrapped gently around the base of his neck. He responded to pressure, not command, shifting beneath them like thunder held in check. Below, the land stretched wide. No towns yet, just the whisper of wood smoke and the distant thread of fences long forgotten. A test waited in the valley. Neither of them knew its name, but it called all the same. By noon they passed a rusted gate half swallowed by sagebrush. The ranch beyond had seen better seasons. 3 buildings leaning in like old drunks, a corral gone to splinters, and a windmill that no longer turned. Still, it was the first sign of people in days. The stallion slowed. The child let him. Then the man stepped from the barn. He was tall, shoulders shaped like quarried stone, face carved by weather and silence. His beard was streaked with ash, and his eyes, one gray, one green, looked like they'd seen too many things and remembered each of them too well. He held a rifle in one hand and a bundle of reins in the other. The stallion stopped completely now, head lifted, body alert. The man didn't raise the gun. Didn't speak. The child slid from the horse's back. "You following us?" they asked. "No," the man said. "I was already here. You been watching." He nodded. You're not hiding. They stood in silence then, air shifting between them. The man's gaze slid from the child to the stallion. His mouth tightened. He's still wild. The child nodded. And I'm still an orphan. Life doesn't always wait for readiness. The man made a noise halfway between a laugh and a sigh. You heading somewhere? The child shrugged. Away. Toward. There's a difference. The stallion took a step forward. Then another. The man didn't move. I'm not here to take him, he said. But I've got something that might help. He set the reins down, leather softened with use, but strong. A tether, but not a chain. The child didn't reach for them. He's not led, they said. We walk together. The man studied them, quiet. Then don't use it as a tether, he said. Use it as a test. The child didn't speak. Just looked at the reins. Then, at the stallion. That night they slept under the open sky, stars sharp as nails. Coyotes howled from somewhere south, and the stallion lifted his head only once before settling back beside the fire. The child tied the reins to their wrist, not to bind the stallion, but to remind them both they had a choice. In the morning, the rope was still there. The next town lay 10 miles down a winding road, marked only by wagon ruts and a fence with missing teeth. Smoke drifted from chimneys. A church steeple blinked through the trees like a tired eye. As they approached, people began to notice. First a boy in overalls, mouth half open with a biscuit still in it. Then a woman with a tin bucket, pausing mid-step. No one spoke. But no one smiled either. The child rode slow. Head up. Posture calm. The stallion's coat gleamed even in shade, and his muscles rolled like rivers under skin. They stopped at the livery stable. The man inside was old, thick-knuckled, and wore a red kerchief like a badge of years. He looked up from his work and froze, pitchfork in hand. You can't tie that thing in my stalls. The child didn't dismount. We won't stay long. You shouldn't stay at all. I need oats. A curry comb if you've got one. The man laughed. Bitter. That horse once belonged to the Federals. I seen the brand. Came through here 3 months back after his rider got shot clean off. Didn't stop running till he trampled 2 mules and a fence post. He stopped running now. Has he? The man asked, eyeing the stallion's neck, the rope slack between him and the child. The child's jaw tightened. He stays outside, then. Fine. They traded silence for supplies, an oilcloth satchel of oats, a brush with half its bristles, a tin of salve. The man took the coins without thanks. When they left, more faces had gathered. Children behind mothers. Men behind barrels. All watching. Waiting for the moment things went wrong. But the moment never came. Outside town, near the river, the child sat and fed the stallion from their hand. He took the oats slowly, breath warm and soft. The brush moved through his mane in careful strokes. You were made for war, the child whispered, but I think you survived it. That's something else entirely. The stallion flicked his ear. That evening, a rider arrived. Dust clung to him like guilt. His badge shone bright against a black vest, and the revolver at his hip looked worn, but well kept. He found them by the river. You the one with the Ellis horse? He asked. The child didn't answer. I'm Marshal Deke. Been riding circuits out here since before your mama came to these parts. She once pulled a bullet out of my shoulder when no one else would touch me. She told me that, the child said. Deke nodded. Then you know she didn't raise fools. The stallion stepped between them. Not aggressive. Just present. You here to take him? The child asked. No. I'm here to tell you that horse was reported stolen. Federals tagged him. But they won't come looking now. Too many bodies between here and the capital. That war's over, even if no one's written the last chapter yet. So why are you here? Deke's eyes settled on the stallion. Because I've seen what happens when something broken gets passed from hand to hand until it stops trying to be whole. But he looks different now. Like he's remembering how to breathe. The child didn't speak. Deke tossed something on the ground. A dog tag. Metal dulled with time. The stallion's ear flicked again. That was his last rider. Name was Weston. Good man. Died with his eyes open and a bullet where his voice used to be. You ever talk to that horse? Tell him he wasn't forgotten. The child nodded once. Deke mounted again. Stay out of trouble, he said. That's all I can offer you. They stayed one more night. Then they rode out, past the edge of maps, where fences gave way to fields and fields gave way to wind. At the edge of a canyon, the child stopped. The drop was steep. The sky was endless. A rope bridge crossed from one side to the next, swaying like a dare. The child looked at the stallion. This is it, they said. The tether or the test. The stallion didn't flinch. He stepped forward, nose brushing the frayed rope. Below, the wind howled. The child went first. Plank by plank. Step by step. The bridge moaned under their weight. Halfway across, they looked back. The stallion stood at the edge. And then he followed. Not fast. Not hesitant. Just sure. When they reached the other side, the child turned and dropped the reins. The stallion stood still. Then, without sound or signal, he stepped beside them. The rope lay between them, forgotten. Not a tether anymore. Just a thread. And neither one pulled. Dawn broke without apology, bleeding soft orange through the clouds and staining the earth in gold. It lit the frost on the grasses until every blade shimmered like glass. The child stood at the edge of a bluff, blanket draped around their shoulders, eyes scanning the far blue line where earth met sky. Beside them, the stallion lifted his head and exhaled into the wind, ears twitching toward the low thunder of hooves carried on the air like an omen. They were not alone out here anymore. The ridge had always been a story, not a place, talked about in fireside murmurs and hard men's laughter. Some said it held ruins. Others swore it was cursed. But the child knew better. The ridge was where people went when there was no one left to tell them they couldn't. And they were riding there now, not to disappear, but to begin something no one else could finish. They saddled the stallion at first light. The leather, stiff from cold, creaked as it settled against his back. The child fastened the cinch slowly, fingers red and stiff. The stallion stood quiet, steady, as if he, too, understood there was a kind of ceremony in leaving something behind. Their path led west, through rolling scrublands waking under the thaw, where jackrabbits darted across the trail and hawks wheeled high above, following them like sentinels. They passed through a grove of bare aspens, their trunks like ghosts with silver skin, then skirted a frozen creek where the bones of a wagon lay collapsed in the snow. The child didn't pause. Neither did the stallion. Around midday, they crossed into territory marked by charred posts, boundary markers from a war no one had properly buried. A man's coat still hung on one, sleeves flapping in the wind like tired flags. The child reached up and unhooked it, folding the cloth gently before tucking it into their saddle roll. Nothing should be left like that, not even a memory. The stallion's ears twitched again. The sound of hooves, distant, but closer now. The child tensed and turned, eyes sharp beneath the shadow of their hat. Behind them, 5 riders crested the hill. They moved with purpose. Dust rose in their wake. Their mounts were lean, riders dressed in brown and black, no colors, no names. The one at the front raised a hand, not in greeting, not in peace. A signal. The child didn't panic. They nudged the stallion forward with their knees and turned into the wind. The stallion responded without hesitation, body stretching out, long strides devouring the earth beneath. The riders gave chase. It wasn't a fair race. The stallion had not galloped like this in months, maybe years. His breath came hot and fast, mane snapping in the wind. The child leaned low over his neck, hands gripping the rope looped loosely beneath his throat. No bit. No bridle. Just belief. They veered through a hollow of stone and scrub, boots skimming brush. The stallion ducked low branches without pause, his hooves finding balance in chaos. Behind them, the riders shouted. One gun cracked, a sharp echo. A bullet passed wide, harmless, but it stitched fire through the cold air. The child didn't look back. They had no saddle horn to cling to, no stirrups, just the strength of legs and trust. They reached the river before sundown. The water ran thick with snowmelt, fast and loud. There was no bridge, only a ford half swallowed in mud and ice. The child didn't ask. The stallion leapt. They landed hard, water soaking their boots, spray rising like glass shattered in reverse. The stallion grunted, muscles bunching again as he fought the current. For one breathless moment, they slid. Then found footing. Climbed. On the other side, they didn't stop. The riders reached the bank minutes later. But none of them crossed. The child slowed only when the trees grew thick again. Pines towered overhead, their roots like claws gripping stone. A clearing opened ahead, a ring of flat land surrounded by cliffs and birch, the earth soft with moss. In the center stood a circle of stones, weather-worn and half-swallowed by ivy. The ridge. The child dismounted. The stallion shook out his mane, nostrils flaring, then lowered his head to drink from a shallow pool fed by a trickle of spring water. The child knelt beside him and whispered, "You carried me here, and now you can stay or go." They unlooped the rope. Let it fall. The stallion lifted his head. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, brushed his cheek against the child's shoulder. The last tether broken. And yet, nothing had been lost. That night, a fire was lit in the stone circle. The wind howled above them, but the flames held steady. The child watched sparks rise into the stars, carrying pieces of every place they'd been. The saddle sat empty now, laid beside the fire like an offering. In the dark, the stallion stood guard, not out of fear, but habit. In the morning, they would ride again, not because they had to flee, but because the world beyond still needed riders. But for now, they had made it to the ridge. And sometimes, making it is more than enough. Until the next trail.